So in this video I want to talk about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Really one of probably the most challenging period in the church's history. It's a tragedy. There was a recent memorial service on the 150-year anniversary of the massacre. And to pause for a minute, the massacre itself, if you're not familiar with the specifics, there were 120 unarmed men, women, and children who were massacred by 50 to 60 militiamen, Latter-day Saints, in the Mountain Meadows area, which is about 35 miles southwest of the Cedar City area. 17 children were not killed. They were considered too young to tell down the road. And they were those that were under 7, and they were kept alive. So President Eyring shared this at the memorial. This was approved by the First Presidency. This was Elder Eyring at the time, in 2007. What was done here long ago by members of our church represents a terrible and inexcusable departure from Christian teachings and conduct. We cannot change what happened, but we can remember and honor those who were killed here. We express profound regret for the massacre carried out in this valley 150 years ago today, and for the undue and untold suffering experienced by the victims then and by the relatives to the present time. A separate expression of regret is owed to the Paiute people who have unjustly borne for too long the principal blame for what occurred during the massacre. Although the extent of their involvement is disputed, it is believed they would not have participated without the direction and stimulus provided by local church leaders and members. There was a recent Gospel Topics essay that was written on this. One section of that essay refers to a recent book published. In the essay it says, in recent years the church has made diligent efforts to learn everything possible about the massacre. In the early 2000s, historians in the Church History Department of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints scoured archives throughout the United States for historical records. Every church record on the massacre was also open to scrutiny. The resulting book by the authors Ronald, Richard Turley Jr., and Glen, Leonard was published by Oxford University Press in 2008. This is the book, Massacre at Mountain Meadows. And there will be a part 2. This deals with the crime. The second book, which will be coming out soon, deals with the aftermath and the punishment period. So I wanted to talk about how this could have happened, if Brigham Young was involved or gave the order, and then some lessons that can be learned from this. First of all, to set the stage, this was during the Utah War. There was concern, as this was part of now the U.S. Territory. President Buchanan was concerned with uprising here in Utah, and with Brigham Young being the governor and the prophet of the people, they wanted to put in a non-Latter-day Saint governor, so they were sending Alfred Cummings here and escorting him here with 1,500 troops from the U.S. Army, and they were led by someone named William Harvey, who terrified the Saints because of his reputation for brutal violence. He was replaced after 2 months by Johnston. That's why we call it Johnston's army there. Brigham declared martial law. He told the people to keep their grain, do not sell any of their grain to the immigrants who were coming through in the wagon trains for people passing through to California on the trails. Also to save your ammunition, to get your guns in good working order, to get the militia ready to protect the territory. That was the environment. This wagon train, the Baker Fancher party that was coming through, they were not able to get their supplies in Salt Lake as they traveled down to Cedar City. Things were getting to a boiling point, and Cedar City was the last stop before you traveled to California. Things really were boiling over with this party, and they were making threats, saying they were going to go and join the U.S. Army to battle the Saints. Somebody even said they had a gun that killed Joseph Smith. There were rumors of poisoning that had happened up in Fillmore, of poisoning of the water streams up there. That may have been fictitious, but these rumors were floating around. Parley P. Pratt had been murdered in Arkansas about a month after this party had left that area. That may have been news that was involved there. There were a lot of things, a lot of confusion, very heightened tensions that were happening at this time. So now I want to talk a little bit about what led up to the attacks. So Isaac Haight was the stake president in Cedar City. He was furious with the behavior of this immigrant train that had come through and wanted to punish them for their threats. He was also the mayor and the militia leader there. So it's an ultimate theocracy position of power there, and that was part of the problem in what happened here. But he had to go to the militia leader of the overall area, which was William Dane. He was down in Parowan, and William Dane held a council there. This council came to the conclusion to not do anything. This was the dispatch they sent back to Isaac Haight in Cedar City. Quote, "Do not notice their threats. Words are but wind. They injure no one. But if they, the immigrants, commit acts of violence against citizens, inform me by express, and such measures will be adopted as will ensure tranquility." Well, Haight was still intent on punishing them, so he came up with a new plan with Robert D. Lee, who was the militia person of where the train had gone to now, this Mountain Meadows area, 35 miles southwest of Cedar City. And also he was the liaison with the Indians, and they came up with a plan to have the Indians be involved in sending a message to them and doing a small attack, creating some pain and taking some of their livestock, etc. They presented, and any of the militia that would be involved would be dressed up as Indians. So they presented this plan to a council that Haight organized. The council was stunned and had a ton of resistance to it, and they said, we need to approach the prophet Brigham Young and get his recommendation on what we should be doing. So they sent a dispatch, a 3-day express. That was the quickest to get it up to Salt Lake from Cedar at the time. So that went up on September 7th. Well, on that very day, Lee and some of the Indians and any militia that were dressed up as Indians did some small attacks. And it did start a 5-day siege, and essentially the immigrant camp formed a circle to protect themselves and were buckled down there. And then there was a critical issue that happened. There were several immigrants that had wandered off. There were 2 militiamen on horses that saw them and went and attacked them, shot, killed one of them. The other escaped and came back to the camp. That created sheer paranoia because now they knew that the immigrants would know that the Saints were involved in this. It wasn't just the Indians. They were fearful that when they got to California, they would tell this to the federal government, which would then come in. They were already on their way, so they thought this would create a very serious situation for everyone in Utah with the impending army approaching. So that sent Haight back. He actually went to Parowan to visit Dame again. They had a second council there in Parowan, and they actually had the same response: no, let them go if they'll go in peace. Haight later lamented, he said, "I would give a world if I had it, if we had abided by the decision of the council." And here is where the Mountain Meadows Massacre was basically decided at this moment. Haight and the counselor that he brought with him met with William Dane after the meeting, pulled him aside, got him alone, and told him 2 things they had not told the council. One was that they knew that the Saints were involved now, that the white man was involved in this. And 2, that most of the immigrants had already been killed, which was a complete fabrication. But this got Dane to change his mind, and Haight viewed it as the opportunity now to call in the militia. He got Robert D. Lee to go in on September 11th, a bad omen day. We've had another tragedy in our history of this country on that day. September 11th, Robert D. Lee goes in with a white flag, a surrender, essentially saying peace treaty. They'll let them come back to Cedar. They'll escort them past the Indians and protect them if they'll leave all their weapons. So they were unarmed. And then at a pre-designed signal after about a mile, there was an ambush. All the militiamen and the Indians that were hiding came in and wiped out everybody, but that the youngest children, those who were under 7, there were 17 of them that were actually adopted then by the local people there. The government, federal government, several years later got them back to their extended families in Arkansas. The sheer, very challenging situation. Brigham Young's letter arrives. It was written on September 10th. It arrives on September 13th, 2 days after the attack. Let me share with you the letter. His letter reported recent news that no U.S. troops would be able to reach the territory before winter. And then here's the quote. "So you see that the Lord has answered our prayers and again averted the blow designed for our heads. In regard to immigration trains passing through our settlements, we must not interfere with them until they are first notified to keep away. You must not meddle with them. The Indians we expect will do as they please, but you should try and preserve good feelings with them. There are no other trains going south that I know of. If those who are there will leave, let them go in peace. While we should be on the alert, on hand, and always ready, we should also possess ourselves in patience, preserving ourselves in property, ever remembering that God rules." When Haight read Young's words, he sobbed like a child and could manage only the words, "Too late, too late." Those involved realized, especially after this letter, that they had to provide a cover-up. And there were lies and stories that were told. Robert D. Lee actually went up to meet Brigham Young 18 days later, came in panting essentially as though he was reporting on what had just happened, and said there were no white men involved. It was all the Paiute Indians that occurred with this massacre. But slowly over time, lots of details that on this video I can't get into, but things began to unravel. And the real story did come out eventually. Isaac Haight and Robert D. Lee were both excommunicated. There were 9 that were indicted. Robert D. Lee did get executed for the crime. And I will say on the excommunication, there has been a lot of controversy about this. There were no records in the local area there. So Juanita Brooks wrote a famous book on this back in the 50s and said that the excommunication was a sham. It's because it happened at the general church level. It was actually by the First Presidency and a quorum of the 12. And the minutes actually were burned up in a fire in the 1880s, but this was recorded in 3 different journals of the participants in the council, the excommunications. It's very clear evidence that it did in fact happen. Now, as far as some lessons, just to close, a couple of lessons. There was an interview that was done with Richard Turley, Jr., one of the authors of the book here, that I'll link in the resources for the video here. And at the end, he gives a couple of lessons from the writing of the book and thinking about this. First of all, if you want to just pause the screen, you can look at the full quote, but he talks about the slippery slope. Otherwise, good people can end up committing an atrocity unless they make decisions that pull them off the slippery slope and back onto firmer ground. There was bad judgment after bad judgment, cover-up after cover-up that happened throughout this process that led to the great atrocity. In his second lesson, he talks about, and I'd love you to pause it and read this quote, but basically there's safety in councils. If they had followed the advice from any of the councils, none of this would have happened. And there was no matter how bad the people were, or if any of the rumors were true, even if they were all true, it wouldn't have justified what happened there at the Mountain Meadows Massacre. That's it for this one.